Welcome to a special edition of the Citi Business Edition, and today we're discussing a whole raft of things with, I don't even know how to describe my guest, but I'm sure as we do the discussion, you would understand. So let me give the context for this interview. It's happening on the back of two things. Herman Chinuhese, one of the most gifted Ghanaians we know, passed away and was laid to rest a few days ago, early November. And because of that, a number of interesting friends of his came back to Ghana to pay their last respects. So we've caught up with some of them and we're talking to them about various things, right? So my guest was met with Herman Fantipim School from 1976 to 1981. when they did their O-levels. So that's one level for the interview. We'll talk a bit about Herman. The other reason I'm interviewing my guest is that the PRESEC 99-year group have been given the onerous duty of organizing a speech and prize giving day, the 86th. And the year group is building an AI lab, and they feel like we need to discuss science, technology, engineering, math, and all those beautiful things with somebody who's gone through the school and who can give us more insight into the importance of things like AI. So they combed around the world and found this gentleman who did his A-level and A-level at PRESEC and said, Bernard, you need to talk to this guy because he's the best we know in this field. So I'm basically straddling two objectives. Kwabena Boying is my guest, and Kwabena is at the forefront of, you can call it, developing AI to its most advanced form, because in very simple terms they are trying to build an artificial brain. Yes, an artificial brain, but it's an evolution of many things that they've done. So I won't get ahead of myself. Let's just say hello to Kwabena. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Well, thanks for having me, and it's finally great to be here in the studio talking to you.
I don't know if you had any more complicated intros like the one I just did. It's amazing. But look, so you're here for Herman in Ghana, right?
Yeah, I got in here Friday, the day before he was laid to rest. Yeah.
I knew him, I won't say close, but I like to think I'm the Ghanaian journalist who's interviewed him the most times, because he used to do a lot of interviews with Citi. He liked the idea of what we're trying to do, and he was very open to new ideas. He's a great guy. Very pained that we lost him this early. But what kind of guy was he from your perspective? How do you know him?
Herman, I left Ghana quite a while ago. I left in 1985. Right? And then I came back in 92. So that was just around the time that they started Soft Tribe. And they were working out of this container in Kanda. So I used to hang out there a lot because there were all these techies, and so we had all kinds of arguments and discussion. But Herman, from Kwaboche days, is always up to something. He's always got some idea he wants to argue about. Wow. He's always just full of energy and very, all kinds of things happening with him. So he just was just very curious and very interested in everything around him.
So you were in Form 1 in 1976?
Yes.
And you did O-levels in 81?
Yeah.
So this was under Champong initially, before the whole Unigov thing. It was a very crazy
It was a tumultuous time.
Yeah.
I remember, I think Navy commander or something like that showed up with soldiers at Kwaboche, and people were stoning him from, like how the dorms are overlooking the main entrance. And some stone hit his hat like that, and he just told the soldiers to charge.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, so we just ran. I mean, this was like maybe 78 or something like that. Yeah, we went on a luta. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was it was crazy time.
But just a bit about the kind of education you had in those days to turn out all of you. I mean, not all of you, but a lot of the people from that matrix doing some pretty interesting things, right? How was Kwaboche in those days?
It was, we had a science club. And there was a guy called Asenso who was maybe when I was in Form 2, he was in 6th Form, and he was the president of the science club. And people like me and Joe Jackson I don't think we saw Herman much. But I remember Joe, Michael Bonson, we were like building hovercrafts. We were always like, working on some projects there as part of this sort of science club, which was quite unique. And then also, Kwabuche had this science block which had just been built. And, so we were doing actual chemistry experiments. So there was a lot of practicals as part of the teaching,
Interesting.
in Form 4 and Form 5,
So essentially, Kwabuche those days would have technical subjects in addition to the pure like sciences, right?
Yeah. So they had something I think is pretty unique. My favorite subjects actually, as I was telling you earlier, was technical drawing and metal work, because I like to build things. Since I was 10, I'm always tinkering. I'm always, my sister would say just breaking stuff. but that was So I like that. So I enjoy those subjects. I would draw everything, and then I would go in the shop and machine stuff and so forth. So I like to do things with my hands.
Which is an interesting difference, because these days our science students generally very good at calculations, very good at doing physics, chemistry, and math and all those things, but I don't know any of them that does technical as part of their training. I think Kwabuche was unique in that sense.
I mean, PRESEC too had it, right?
Did they?
Yeah.
So you did PRESEC in 82?
Yeah, so I was at PRESEC from 81 to 83 for A levels.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
81 to 83. How different was PRESEC from Kwabuche?
You guys had it easy. You were right in a crowd. Life was, it was just much more in the sea. Kwabuche is pretty isolated out in Cape Coast. And then also, there was co-ed. There were girls coming in for classes and things like that. There were people doing continuing education and stuff. People. So there was a lot more. Going on.
So it was like a place where people who did well in science, who wanted to further.
Yeah. So it was like
exactly.
So like the top science place, because they had they really, I think the government had invested to set up the facilities and so forth, made it like we're going to make this a top.
So it was a science college in the late 70s and 80s that really made the school then. That's where we started our
so there was this focus on science and so forth, So I remember my year group, there were 4 guys from Kwabuche came to PRESEC, and all of us got 4 A's in the A levels.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is like bringing the best of the best together. So A's, physics, chemistry, math, biology, A's.
General paper.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we see how government policy can influence things like this. Of course, you had gone to university primary school.
Yeah.
So you were, it was also not too far from home.
Yeah.
So it was much easier for you.
Yeah.
But in Ghana, your Form 1 to 5 is your school.
Exactly.
So you are a Kwabuche boy with PRESEC credentials.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Now, in Form 3, you invented a corn planting machine.
Yeah.
Was that part of the curriculum? How did you end up doing that?
So I don't remember how we found out about it, but there was a national science fair. Just like how now you have the national math and science quiz. In those days, there was a national science fair. You might have heard about the Intel Talent Fair and things like they do in the U.S. So it's similar to that, where you would, people would build projects, they would build things, and then they'll bring them to this fair, and the judges will go around and talk to the inventors about their inventions and so on and so forth, and then at the end they would judge and pick the best. So I'm not sure how we found out, but we were told that we could compete in this. It wasn't really an organized thing like it is now with the NSMQ, but we found out, probably from a metalworking teacher, Mr. Smith, that there was we could enter this competition. So myself and one of my classmates, Michael Bonson, came up with this idea of building a corn planting machine. And he had visited his father's farm, and he had seen them planting in the village. He'd seen them planting corn, how they would plant them a certain distance apart in straight lines and go back and forth and do this. And he saw that was a lot of work, and so the idea was could we design a machine to automate this? And so we ended up, basically designing this thing, which was kind of like a wheelbarrow, but a little bit backwards. It had this wide front with these hoppers where you put your maize, and as the axle rotated, it had 2 wheels. As it rotated, there we had this mechanism where when it lined up with the hopper, the corn would just flow through, and there was a little spike on the axle that would make the hole. The corn would fall in there, and there was a little flap in the back that, as you pushed along, would come and cover it up.
Wow.
And there were two of them at the right spacing, so you're planting 2 rows of corn at the right spacing, and then you turn around and come back, and go back and forth. And
this was the best project in Ghana at the time.
Yeah, so we
this
won.
was like 79ish.
It was probably 78.
78s,
Probably 78. Yeah. So.
And you went to the African.
Yeah. So we won for the competition there, and the government basically sent us to Lagos for the international science fair. So.
Wow.
That was exciting. That was really.
Did anybody offer
first time.
money to commercialize the invention? Or no. But I thought
we didn't file any patents.
But that's a funny thing, because
yeah.
this is an agrarian Ghana. A student has come up with a more efficient way of planting corn. You would have thought that a process could have been initiated to say, how can we build a version of this that can make it
you need
easier?
an ecosystem, right? You need, not just the inventor and the entrepreneur, but you need, people, VCs, venture capitals or angel investors. You need people who can mentor. So all this stuff takes time to develop, right? And in those days, we weren't even thinking about.
But I use that to talk about having talent, great ideas, but an ecosystem to harness it. Because now, and I'm jumping ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Now you're at Stanford.
Yeah.
And the people you're raising money to do serious stuff because the ecosystem exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not enough to have smart people. It's also important to build things that can allow them to thrive.
Yeah, but it's organic, right? So I have people who have taken my classes in Stanford, undergrads, who 5-6 years later are VCs. They've raised a fund. And so if you are a undergrad at Stanford and you're trying to start up a company, there's somebody who was there in your shoes like just a few years ago. So the main thing is to have people. And where do VCs come from? VCs are usually successful entrepreneurs, where then they decide that they are going to invest their money in that. So you just have to have one success, right? And then that leads to all these things, right?
Let's talk about what you're doing now and the evolution of that, because the first story I properly sort of came across about you was in 2014. And let me just read a few paragraphs there.
Okay.
Neurogrid, a circuit board modeled after the human brain. Then it basically says, although the basic computer architecture we rely on was designed to handle math and logic problems, it's done a bang-up job of tackling everything from word processing and socializing to controlling the movements of artificial limbs. But as we demand increasingly human-like work from machines, pressure is mounting to rejigger and expand their basic architecture to better jibe with the brain's way of doing things. Second paragraph. If we ever want to be able to run a computer that simulates the 100 billion neurons at work in a human brain, though each of its silicon chips will have to sip, not gulp energy, and while computers will have to process information through pathways more organic and complex than the classic von Neumann architecture, they will have to keep up a demanding pace. Now here's the hook. Eyeing those problems on the horizon, a team of Stanford University engineers led by Kwabena Boahin, who's my guest in brackets, has developed a circuit board and its underlying chips that simulates the activity of 1 million neurons 9,000 times faster than a personal computer could, and is 100,000 times more energy efficient. They reported their findings in a recent issue of IEEE. The circuit board, called Neurogrid, consists of 16 custom-designed neurocore chips. Each chip simulates 65,536 neurons. All told, the board can simulate 1 million neurons and billions of synaptic connections. Now, this is 10 years ago, and I'm really struggling to understand what I just read. What is this? Walk me through. I'm sure the journey began more than 10 years ago, right? But this is a good place to start, all right? And then walk me through how we got to a point of saying now you are building an artificial brain. What did I just read?
So, thanks for getting into the weeds on this one. Yeah, but the, I like to start a little bit earlier, right? So, I finished my sixth form, right, at PRESEC. And then I did my national service at CSIR. So this is maybe like at airport. This may be like in 84, 83 to 84. And around that time, my dad came back from sabbatical and brought one of these personal computers. It was almost like a glorified electronic calculator. And you hook it up to your TV to see the display. And you'd hook it up to your cassette recorder to store your programs. And that was like your hard disk, right? And, and we were, we could program BASIC on it. You could play a game called Pong and so forth. So it was a lot of fun. But, like me, I'm always going to take something apart and figure out what's going on. And, but I was too intimidated to take this thing apart. So I went in the CSIR library and, I took all the books about computers. And so I basically taught myself how a computer worked. And I basically read about the program counter, the RAM, how you basically, the ALU, and how you get it to do an add or a multiply, all the way down to the logic, like zeros and ones, ands and ors, in negation, all the stuff. So, and once I had figured it out, I was totally unimpressed. I thought this was such a brute force way of doing things. In other words, you needed so much circuitry, so many transistors. Start with such simple or brain dead, kinds of operations. And by the time you do a multiplication or something that's sophisticated, you have to do so much work and you have to do so many instructions and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I felt there had to be a more elegant way of doing this, right? So I was already looking for something different, And this is one of the points that I make, to, people, especially now having lived in the States and gone back and forth, is that, my contemporaries in the States, like if you were a teenager at that age, you were reading, HAL 2000, Arthur C. Clarke, all the science fiction. Mm-hmm. And they were talking to the computer. The computer was saying, I cannot do that data, or whatever. It was intelligent and all this kind of stuff. So they were sort of biased or predisposed to think that these things were these very powerful machines. But I was just looking at it for what it's worth. I hadn't read, that science, and what I saw didn't impress me. And so coming from that perspective, I was looking for a more elegant way of doing this. And this is how I got to where I am now, because it started back then.
So this is even pre-university?
Yeah.
So then when you finished CSR National Service, you got admission into tech?
Yeah.
To study electrical engineering?
Yeah.
But because at the time, I don't think computer science was a program available.
Yeah, it wasn't a separate program, but in electrical engineering, you learned Fortran, and there was you did some computer programming.
But you abandoned the tech course and went abroad.
Yeah, so then I left after a year, and I did my undergrad at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore.
So this was still in electrical engineering.
Yeah.
So how different was that experience from the tech experience? So how different was I'm still trying to lace the journey of this brain through educational development.
So this sort of personal computer that my dad brought, we were writing programs in BASIC, right? We're compiling them, we're getting to run. And at Tech, I took a Fortran class. And, they give you an assignment like, you write a program to sort numbers or something like that. And you would write it out on your, in pen and paper. And you would hand that in, and then you get it back graded that your program was correct or not. You never actually entered it into a computer. You never compiled it. You never debugged. All the stuff that I was already doing it was basic at all.
Writing on paper.
You don't.
It was boring.
That's how you learn programming. So that's very different from
wow. So when you entered Johns Hopkins was obviously a different experience.
It wasn't it was, now you could actually, people didn't have their own computers at that time. It was like timeshare.
Yeah.
So you go into a computer room, there were all these terminals, and then you would do your assignment. But you'll be programming, you'll be compiling, you'll be doing all the stuff.
So this would be 86, 87-ish?
Yeah.
Was computer science a well-defined
field? Oh, yeah, computer science
was
it was. It was.
So in 86, 87 at Johns Hopkins, you had access to terminals, practically solve real problems with the machine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're still talking about how you got to where.
Okay, yeah. So it was actually at Hopkins too, right? So the when I was maybe what they call a sophomore
Yeah.
second year, I went to a talk by a guy called Terry Sejnowski. In fact, the Nobel Prize was just awarded for, neural networks. And this guy, Jeff Hinton, and Terry Sejnowski wrote a paper, this Boltzmann machine, which was a two-layer or a simple, in terms of layers, the way neural networks are advanced is that they get more and more layers of processing or units.
Mm-hmm.
And this thing had only two layers, so it was like a very primitive neural network. But that was what they cited. And so Terry Sejnowski was at Hopkins at the time. And I heard him give a talk about a neural network he trained called NetTalk. And what the network did was that it took text. The way they're feeding it text, they started with like children's books. So they were feeding it this text from children's books. And then they were also telling it what the phonemes were for those words, so that it learned to go from the words to the speech, right, the sound. And so then he was able to train a network to do this, like where, it would start out when early in the training, it would just babble. But like as you went, fed it more and more text, mm-hmm. It started to like sound like a baby who was learning to talk. And at some point you could actually understand what it was saying, which was very impressive because he played back those phonemes with this thing called a vocoder. And so I heard that talk and I was blown away. I thought this was really elegant because, you don't have to write some stupid program with all these lines of code, debug it. And also you could solve a problem that you didn't even know what the algorithm was for, right? Because you don't know which letter goes to which phoneme. But just by giving examples to the network, it would adjust its weights, the connections between its units, using this algorithm called backprop, which was also and that was so I was hooked.
So this is how this is how the journey began.
Yeah. So that's when I saw the light that this was a better approach than these brute force computers, because it was like inspired by the brain, and I didn't really. Biology was one of my favorite subjects, so I didn't really know much about what the brain did and so forth.
Although you had your
you
had your 4 years, so you have a basic biology knowledge.
Yeah, I don't think I took biology. I took physics, math, chemistry, and general paper. Those days you take 4 subjects.
And the irony is that now everything you're doing is based on understanding how the brain functions.
Yeah, but you can,
of course,
you can learn that.
So
it's
for you,
being able to solve problems. Yeah.
So in a sense, the brain obviously is the most efficient computer of all time, and basically Absolutely. You are trying to see how best you can mimic that using the least power. That's basically what you're trying to do.
Yes.
And it's a very fundamental problem, because the more closer we get to the brain, the better things we can do with machines.
So you can basically, people like Terry Sejnowski, this was in like like we just said, like 86, 87. They already had these ideas. They had like these, they were adding more layers to these networks. They had backprop, which an algorithm could train it, and so on and so forth. And this was going on for like 30 years, from the 80s. It wasn't until like 2011, right, 2012, that these neural networks basically became, became commercially relevant, right? When, Jeff Hinton students entered this competition to recognize images, and they blew everybody away, okay? And so that was, but, so what made the difference, right? The thing that made the difference is that they figured out how to use GPUs, which can do a lot more operations per second because they operate in parallel. Mm-hmm. Than these single core computers we're using before that, right?
By GPU you mean, is it graphics processing
unit? Yeah, okay. Which are normally used to play games. But by making the point that the technology was what was limiting the amount of compute we could get or we could afford, was what was limiting progress in this field. It's fundamental. And once these two students figured out how to like get GPUs to do these sort of vector matrix multiplications that you need to train these networks and to operate them, they were able to then get access to a lot more computing power. And then you saw these amazing results. So it's technology that's driving this.
Wow. This is a special edition of Citi Business Edition. My guest is Kwabena Boahin. I don't know what he calls himself. Are you a biomedical engineer? Are you a
I am what they call a neuromorphic engineer.
a neuromorphic engineer?
Yeah.
Basically, trying to imitate how the brain functions
Yeah.
in engineering and technology. He happens to be the son of the legendary Professor Edu Boahen. We haven't even gone there yet. We're interviewing him on a number of levels. Of course, his friend Herman Hesse was laid to rest early November, and he's in Ghana. Therefore, we're speaking to him. But the PRESEC 99-year group also wanted me to interview him because they are unveiling an AI center later this month, and they believe that a conversation around this type of thing would inspire a lot more young people to take up the field. So the likes of Bright Simmons and co. really encouraging us to do this interview. We'll take a breather, and when we come back, we will continue with the conversation. Stay with us.
Give me some love, somebody. La, 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 la.